This is just sort of general stuff about the UK government targets to cut emissions by 78% by 2035 compared to 1990 levels. Obviously, the Ambassador just mentioned we're looking at the 2050 net zero as well, but these are the figures that are sort of, immediately in focus up to 2035. And businesses active in the UK low carbon and renewable energy economy generated £42.6 billion in turnover in 2019. So I'm guessing that's about 50 billion US dollars for those not familiar with the pound exchange rate. Obviously 2019 was probably the last full year all of us have had before COVID. So those are pretty impressive figures, and obviously we're looking to grow those. And indeed, based on analytics report from the UK's low carbon environmental goods and services sector, the UK's low carbon economy is now worth more than £200 billion. So again, about 250 billion US dollars and growing. And that's almost 4 times the size of the country's manufacturing sector, with growth expected to accelerate in the coming years. So I think that'll give you a sense of how quickly this sector is moving and how important it is with those developments. And the UK, we think, has a strong offer in renewables, waste management, energy to waste, hydrogen. We'll be hearing a little bit more about electronic vehicles later on, energy storage, carbon capture, decarbonation, energy efficiency, and green finance. So these are all key areas for us, and I think they're crucial areas at the moment. So I don't suppose, and it'll be lost on you, that we've got a few problems in the UK with the supply chain, certainly as far as oil and gas is concerned, and petrol. And I think what that is making people think about increasingly is the importance of moving to cleaner energies and ones that are more sustainable. So UK's long-term reduction in greenhouse gas output in the world over the course of the 21st century on that chart. So you can see how ambitious and how steep downwards, I'm pleased to say, that graph is. Findings of new research by PwC, the UK's carbon dioxide emissions fell by 3.7% every year, and the report reveals that the country decreased its consumption of coal, natural gas and oil while expanding the production of renewable energy, particularly wind power. Now there's clearly a lot more to do on that and a lot further to go, but we think we're moving very clearly in the right direction. And the study suggests that the UK still needs to continue investing around £400 billion, so again, roughly $500 billion in green infrastructure and renewable energy to deliver on our net zero emissions target. So the target's ambitious, but the amount of investment that's required is also very ambitious. Tanya's going to talk more about electric vehicles, and she has a level of expertise which I don't, but it's worth saying there, some of the facts are on there for you. But in 2020, 175,000 new plug-in electric cars were registered in the UK, and that was 140% more than a year ago, taking 10.7% of the total market. So that's quite a large chunk of the market in a relatively short period of time. Just speaking from personal experience, even 5 years ago, I very rarely knew anybody in the UK who had an electronic vehicle. Now I know a few people. The figures suggest 1 in 10. So it's not overwhelming just yet, but it's definitely moving on a sharp upwards curve. And I know there are some in Russia. In fact, when we came to the SPIBA conference earlier this year, the ambassador came up in her vehicle, which is a purely electronic Jaguar. I think there were challenges getting it up here, mainly because the infrastructure on the road up from Moscow to St. Petersburg still needs more investment. But we managed to get the car here, and the ambassador was very keen that we did that to make a statement. Again, it's around the infrastructure. There are now more than 42,000 charge point connectors across the UK in over 15,500 locations. That's more public places to charge than petrol stations, with around 7,000 charge point connectors added in 2020 alone. I guess comparing to the UK to Russia, of course, is not an easy comparison, because geographically we have such a small sort of land mass, whereas in Russia, obviously, to do this, the land mass you're covering is considerably more. But it does give you a sense of what can be done. And 2/3 of all new electric cars bought in the UK are purchased by businesses rather than private buyers, according industry body. And I know that Vauxhall, who's one of the big UK motor manufacturers, part of the Stellantis group, has just announced very big plans for a new plant in the north of England dedicated purely to electric vehicles. So again, the big companies are investing in this. Electric Vehicles Fleet Accelerator, formed by the CEO of 7 large UK companies, which was BP, BT Direct Line Group, Royal Mail, Scottish Power, Severn Trent and Tesco, one of the big supermarket chains, constitutes the owners and operators of some of the biggest van fleets in the country, complemented by infrastructure, energy, retail, insurance and repair capability. And the group aims to use electronic fleets as a catalyst to accelerate the widespread conversion to EVs across Britain. And I think that's probably worth mentioning, just because one of the other sort of crunches we've got in the UK is the supply chain. And obviously, you know, with problems with the gas supply, where people have got electronic vehicles and they're able to use those efficiently, then that's going to be a big boost to getting things around the UK. And then the Faraday Battery Challenge is part of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, with an investment of £330 million between 2017 and 2021 to support a world-class scientific technology development and manufacturing scale-up capabilities for batteries in the UK. And that challenge is focused on developing cost-effective, high-performance, durable, safe and recyclable batteries to capture a growing market. Now, there are people here who will be speaking later on who know much more about this than I do, but my understanding, of course, is that one of the issues I think that's perhaps sort of, you know, held back some of the progress on electric vehicles is the length of the batteries. So I think the fact that the big companies, and I'm sure Tanya will say what Nissan are up to on this, but I think the big companies recognise this and realise that the investment in the batteries is obviously one of the crucial things to keeping the vehicles still moving. Going on just a little bit about waste management, and this is an area where we are working with Russia, with the Waste Management Operators Association. We took some Russian companies to the UK a couple of years ago, and we're looking to do a little bit more of that in the future, because it's an area where we see some real sort of potential for growth. So all UK waste management companies are part of the process of developing the circular economy, and the better their systems, the more efficient our use of materials. And 41.1 million tonnes of industrial waste is produced each year in the UK. And I imagine there's considerably more in Russia, given that it's obviously a much bigger country with a bigger population. And industrial waste consists of any waste produced by industrial activity during the manufacturing process, and consists of chemicals, hazardous and toxic waste, and be disposed of in numerous ways. And the UK tends to use the latest technologies and highly efficient systems to divert the maximum amount of waste from landfill, obviously. And I know there's been some issues around landfill in Russia, but we don't want the landfill in the UK. If you can burn it and turn it into waste and sort of energise it in that way, then that's a much better result for everybody. And it's the responsibility of all businesses to always make sure the waste they produce are managed, disposed and recovered safely, responsibly and in accordance with the law. And again, I'm sure the Russian legal sort of standards on this are quite tight. Certainly the ones are in the UK. So people know that they have pretty much no choice but to do this properly, albeit I think we're probably all conscious that there are costs involved with disposing of waste. But in the long run, we would see that as being absolutely the right way of doing things. And commercial and industrial waste management is a highly specialised operation. Commercial, legal and reputational risks of contaminants escaping into the environment are significant. And again, I imagine, you know, I can remember the big spill last year over in Siberia. And when these things happen, it goes very badly for the companies involved. So again, companies have to be very, very conscious of this and invest the right amounts of money to make sure that these accidents don't happen. No, gone too far on that one, sorry. There we go. I think there's a slight delay on this. Yeah, just in terms of some of the offers: wastewater treatment, environmental monitoring, waste management, ground reinforcement, soil stabilization and waterproofing, solutions for satellite monitoring and digital twins modelling. So these are some of the areas that we're looking at and would like to make some real progress on. Yes, just slight delay on the slides, which I'm getting used to. Yeah, industrial sectors in the UK must decarbonise on an accelerated basis for the UK to have any chance of meeting these, requiring a green industrial revolution that coincides with the wider political to build back greener. That's one of the phrases you'll have heard lots of these things used quite generally, but that's what we're trying to achieve, and certainly build back greener from the effects of COVID. And I was watching the news today. It's interesting that with the energy crisis going on, and of course we've got issues in the UK and I think into Europe and certainly in China, as I understand it at the moment, it's interesting to see that energy has taken COVID off the front pages to a certain extent of the newspapers, which again just suggests how serious the issues are. And we're taking a cluster-led approach to industrial decarbonisation, focusing early effort on developing 4 decarbonised clusters in the UK's key industrial centres. And you can see those on there, the Teesside one doing quite a lot of the work on the hydrogen. The other issue about that, this is, certainly as far as the UK is concerned, it's partly political and economic. So it's moving and developing some of the economies away from London, so taking it away from the big financial centres, but moving it into some of the other regions, helping to develop the economies of those parts of the country as well. We call it the levelling up agenda, is what the media refer to it, but I guess it's a bit like moving some of the businesses away from, say, Moscow and St. Petersburg and putting them into other cities where investment's needed. So it seemed to be a good thing as far as that's concerned. Yeah, and those 6 projects across the UK will receive a share of £8 million in funding as part of a drive to create the world's first net zero emissions industrial zone by 2040. And the 6 winners, the people managing those, are a combination of consultancies, development companies, local authorities, partnerships and consortiums. Yeah, just moving on to hydrogen. Again, this is one area where we have been having some discussions with our Russian partners and the Russian government, because it's an area I know that Russia has just announced a new strategy on. We have a UK strategy, so what we're trying to do from an embassy point of view, from a trade point of view, is see where those things come together and see where the overlap is, and to see where we can work together on those. So the UK has a long-standing history with hydrogen since the discovery of inflammable air by Henry Cavendish in the mid-18th century. Hydrogen has played a role in our everyday lives, from helping to fertilise our fields to providing parts of the town gas that lit our streets and heated our homes until the late 20th century. The hydrogen strategy is one of a series of strategies. The Climate Change Summit, COP26, which the Ambassador referred to, taking place in Glasgow in November. So very soon, it's coming around very quickly. And hydrogen can be made as safe as natural gas. As the hydrogen economy develops, all necessary assessments will be carried out and measures put in place to ensure that hydrogen is stored, distributed and used in a safe way. And certainly we will work with industry to meet our ambition for 5 gigawatts of low-carbon hydrogen production capacity by 2030. And that's the equivalent of replacing natural gas in powering around 3 million UK homes each year, as well as powering transport and businesses, and particularly heavy industry. A little bit about green finance and the capital markets, so certainly an area, given the City of London, that we're particularly keen on. So the UK is one of the leading green finance ecosystems in the world, and ESG bond listings on the London Stock Exchange have so far amounted to over 300 issuances, raising £70 billion worth of capital in the process. And I think particularly for Russian companies, there's a considerable number of the Russian mining companies listed in London, then they'll be very aware of these standards that they need to meet and match to maintain their listings in London. And Russian companies are already listed in London and benefit from the access to a large and diverse pool of investors who have a strong appetite for ESG investments. London serves as a leading global hub where businesses and investors meet, and listing in London will help raise capital and finance ESG transformation of your businesses. And it's become imperative, whether developing a strategy or implementing a transformation program in your company. UK partners offer best-in-class services in developing ESG strategies and advise large corporate businesses on implementation of various globally recognised ESG standards. And I know this is an area we've been working with the Moscow International Financial Centre on this. We know this is an area that Russian companies are very keen on finding out more about. and they actively develop and facilitate ESG transformation programs, help companies attain ESG credentials for disclosure purposes, and enable access to international capital markets for green finance. That's the end of my comments, which I hope were useful. I'm conscious they're very general and you've got some experts to follow, so I look forward to hearing what the experts have to say. Those are our contact details for anyone who wants to follow up with us. I'm looking at Svetlana as she's hiding away at the back of the room, but my colleague Svetlana is here from the embassy as well, so we'll be staying around hopefully for a drink or two afterwards if anyone wants to follow up on those specific points. And I think I'm just handing back over to you now, Tanya.
Very much. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to join today. So today I'm going to provide you with a brief overview of the hydrogen economy in the UK and its role in decarbonising the economy. So in terms of the company I work for, we've been involved in providing consulting services to the renewable energy sector for the past 20 years, and we've been involved in planning and consenting of around 15 gigawatts of renewable energy supply, covering onshore and offshore wind, solar, bioenergy, and more recently hydrogen, which is the topic for discussion today. This has been enabled by the UK government's ambitious plan for renewable energy as part of the wider effort to meet its legally binding target to reach net zero emissions by 2050. So hydrogen offers a solution to decarbonise the hard-to-reach parts of our economy, such as heavy industry and transport, and it will be essential to support the UK's commitment to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. It will play a key role across multiple sectors, complemented by other decarbonisation options, such as electrification and carbon capture and storage. In the past, there have been various peaks of interest in hydrogen, but it didn't take off. The viability today is underpinned by the rapid decline in renewable energy costs, advances in technology, and also political will. The UK has taken a leading role in de-risking the technologies and providing a pathway towards full-scale commercialisation. So the current production of hydrogen in the UK is 27 terawatt hours. It's primarily used as a fuel or a feedstock for the chemicals, steel and fertiliser industries. Production is expected to grow 20-fold within the next 10 years to help decarbonise the UK economy. There are several different flavours of hydrogen, each with a different basis of production and emissions footprint. So grey and brown hydrogen are also referred to as high carbon or fossil-based hydrogen. They're created by mature technologies. Blue hydrogen is essentially grey or brown hydrogen with the addition of carbon capture and storage, usually involving sequestration in disused underground formations. Then we move on to green hydrogen. This is produced from the electrolysis of water in an electrolyser with electricity from renewable sources such as wind or solar PV. This is also referred to as clean or renewable hydrogen. Currently, neither green or blue hydrogen are cost competitive, and in order to be competitive requires some form of government support or incentive. So as part of the recently released UK hydrogen strategy, Westminster has launched a public consultation on a preferred hydrogen business model, influenced by the existing Contract for Difference scheme. This would aim to overcome the cost gap between low carbon hydrogen and fossil fuels, helping the price of the former to fall quickly. You'll note that even without support, green hydrogen will become cost competitive by 2030 and will have a significant advantage by 2050. This is underpinned by advances in scaling in electrolyser technology and the continued reduction in the cost of renewable energy production. The UK's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution features low carbon hydrogen on point 2 of the plan, with a planned capacity of 5 gigawatts installed by 2030, built around several large-scale industrial cluster projects. This is closely coupled to point 8, involving the development of a large-scale carbon capture, usage and storage schemes across the UK. And the future growth into green hydrogen will be driven through point 1 on the plan, involving the development of 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. And that's sufficient alone to meet the UK's energy demand, but on the proviso that long-term energy storage solutions can be found to balance seasonal and also multi-year demand. Building upon the 10-point plan, the UK hydrogen strategy was released recently, covering production, networks and use to deliver a total emission saving of 41 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent over the next 10 years. This maintained the 10-point plan ambition of 5 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen production capacity by 2030, with 1 gigawatt installed by 2025. The focus remains on a blue hydrogen and a twin track approach with green hydrogen production. So the intent is for government to invest in and de-risk projects to unlock at least £4 billion worth of private sector co-investment during the early stages of the hydrogen economy. This figure was prepared in support of the EU hydrogen strategy, but is directly relevant to other markets, including the UK. It identifies market demand, technology, production costs, and infrastructure availability as key barriers. You can see some of the proposed solutions. In the Netherlands, a joint offshore wind hydrogen tender process is being considered. In Germany, the provision of levy exemptions is being considered to attract investment. On infrastructure, the Netherlands and Germany have both identified a solution involving repurposing existing infrastructure to provide a hydrogen network or backbone. Regarding demand, Germany notes a solution around providing greater surety for developers through commercial and contractual arrangements, whilst the Netherlands is looking towards the creation of hydrogen valleys, similar to the UK's industrial clusters, whereby economies of scale can be realised. This map provides a good snapshot of the number of hydrogen projects that are underway in the UK. In total, there are at least 30 known projects within the public domain and many more that are due to come to market. This comprises at least 22 green hydrogen projects of varying scales and 9 hydrogen CCUS projects, that's carbon capture usage storage projects. In support of the UK's net zero ambition, the National Grid is advancing a feasibility study called Project Union to explore the development of a UK hydrogen backbone, as you can see here to the right. This would connect the major industrial clusters and supply 25% of the UK's gas demand, largely through repurposed infrastructure. There is also potential to link this to the EU hydrogen backbone to support future import and export opportunities. HyNet is based around Merseyside. It's one of the most advanced industrial projects in the UK. It's due to be implemented by 2025. The overall capex is around £1 billion. The key components of the scheme involve blue hydrogen production, carbon capture directly from industry, carbon storage into the Liverpool Bay gas field using new and repurposed pipelines. And in terms of end use, hydrogen supply is a blend into the gas network for use by industry and heavy transport. And for future consideration, subsurface hydrogen storage in disused caverns, underground storages to help manage winter peak demand, and also a shift towards green hydrogen production via offshore wind. The UK has some of the most advanced privately backed hydrogen projects in the world and could be considered as a market leader. This includes several large-scale industrial scale hydrogen and CCS projects, including HyNet, Gigastack, Acorn, Net Zero Teesside, and Zero Carbon Wales. There are also a number of proof of concept to pilot scale trials for different approaches to green hydrogen production, and a number of projects for the transport sector, so aircraft, trains, and light vehicles, including Glasgow City Council's recently announced hydrogen fuels waste collection fleet. Early trials are also underway on the use of hydrogen as a blend with natural gas for household heating as part of the High Deploy project. This slide provides a short summary of some of the key environmental considerations. Water availability can be a key consideration in resource-constrained areas, as 15 to 20 litres of water is required to produce 1 kilogram of green hydrogen. Similar amounts are required for blue hydrogen. Air quality and the issue of fugitive emissions is important. Blue hydrogen is dependent on ensuring that carbon capture efficiencies are high and that there are viable solutions for long-term carbon storage. Hydrogen itself is an indirect greenhouse gas and has the potential to marginally increase the concentrations of methane and ozone in the lower atmosphere, so needs to be managed carefully. Safety in planning, design and operation is also very important across the value chain, given the potential for explosions or fire. This is exacerbated by the high pressures that hydrogen is stored at, typically between 300 and 800 bar. And finally, as with any new technology or energy source, there is a need to engage widely with stakeholders and local communities on a strategic and project-by-project basis to provide assurance over safety and create and maintain social license to operate for new facilities. So just a few key takeaways. I think the first is that hydrogen will become an important energy vector, supporting decarbonisation of those parts of our economy that are hard to reach, that can't just be replaced through electrification. And this will overall help the UK to meet its net zero commitments and is in fact essential. The economics of green hydrogen production are becoming increasingly attractive, and even without subsidy, this will become cost competitive by 2030. There are a whole range of projects going on, from pilot right through to full-scale commercial deployment across the UK value chain, and it's a very exciting time to be working in this field. The key environmental considerations cover water, wastewater, air emissions and safety, and they all need further work. And really the most critical thing is the enabling infrastructure, the right incentives that are put in place, scaling of the underpinning technologies, and also a careful balance of the market demand and supply are really required to unlock growth. And I thank you very much. So certainly in the short term, subsidies and incentives are required to support green hydrogen, but we are seeing a rapid decline in the levelized cost of energy in terms of renewable energy production, and also rapid scaling of electrolyzer solutions. So it will be interesting to see, but certainly during the early period, I think some support will be required. And I think that's consistent across many countries, but at a particular point in time, it will become self-standing.
Very much, Katja. My name's Deborah Sacks. I'm the Waste and Resources Specialist based in London, working on waste management and renewable energy. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the impact of waste management on climate change. And the way in which that's calculated is not very straightforward, because the impact of different kinds of materials is usually the way that climate change impacts and greenhouse gases are measured. But in terms of looking at unmanaged waste and the residual waste and organic material that finds its way into the environment, there are some very major impacts on climate change. Possibly the biggest one is methane emissions, because when organic material is sent to landfill or left in the open environment to rot down, it can either produce CO2 from composting or methane. And if that material can be captured, if that methane in particular can be captured, you can put it into an engine to make electricity, you can use it to make heat, or you can use it to power transport or machinery as a replacement for diesel. So capturing the methane from wastes and residual waste is a really key technology that we've been pursuing in the UK. And probably the best way of doing that is through anaerobic digestion. So if you collect your organic waste separately, either from farms or food waste from households or restaurants or food manufacturers, put that into anaerobic digestion facilities and you capture the methane, then you've got a really circular economy approach to the management of waste. And there's quite a lot of facilities in the UK which are now making that biomethane and putting it into heavy trucks, because while we've heard a little bit about electric vehicles, for heavy transport, batteries are still not quite suitable. So there are some companies, some of the big retailers and food distribution companies, who are transferring all their small vehicles to electric vehicles and their large vehicles to biomethane. And obviously, if you have a food manufacturing plant or a farm, you've got the feedstock, you transfer that into methane, biomethane, and you've got a really circular economy. And the other impacts, just to think about, are the pollution of the environment if waste isn't managed properly. So if it's discarded, then material just goes and pollutes the water or the soil, or if it's burned in the street or in somebody's backyard, then it pollutes the air. So, and that's very common around the world, but there's much better ways of managing waste and not polluting the air, and it obviously creates much harm to human health and the wider environment. So the key message with regard to waste management is to collect the waste. And in the UK, and I imagine Russia, this is efficiently done, but it's worth bearing in mind that 1 in 3 people in the world don't have access to any sort of waste management service, and nobody collects their waste. So they dispose of it themselves. either by burning or burying it, or just discarding it into a watercourse. The pictures I've shown there are of particular kinds of waste streams where a lot of my work is focused. The management of waste electronics is this is still the right slide. That's fine. I'll tell you when to move on to the next one. Thank you. Just talking about waste electronics in that picture at the bottom on the left there. This is a very major waste stream now, with a lot of very valuable materials in it. So we're doing quite a lot of work in terms of trying to retrieve those materials, the plastics and the precious metals, in order to put back into new materials. But there's quite a lot of high-tech efforts going into retrieving that safely, because there's quite a lot of hazardous materials in there, as well as persistent organic pollutants. We've got a picture of tyres there, which is a particular problem in the UK. I don't know if it is for you, but we've got a lot of technologies now looking at shredding and then making fuel from tyres and carbon black through using pyrolysis technology. That picture on the bottom right is a bale of plastics, which I'll come on to again later. And the picture at the top is actually just to represent data management, and just to make the point really that with regard to waste, if you know how much there is and what it is, where it's going, you've got a good chance at managing the waste stream properly. So tracking the waste and understanding how much of it is going where and what's in it is a really key part of the process. Can I have the next slide, please? Thanks. So the nature of waste management is complex, and there's lots of different policy departments and lots of different policies that are concerned with it in the UK, certainly. But the Environment Department is really the key one, because they're concerned with environmental protection. And the waste policy is really essential to have in place, because otherwise the easiest way of disposing of waste is illegally, just dump it somewhere. So the UK has developed its resources and waste strategy, which talks a lot about how the best ways of collecting waste and supporting householders and communicating with householders on how to do this. It's a very, very fundamental service for UK residents that their waste will be collected. But in order to support them in disposing of their waste properly, quite a lot of effort goes into the communications and talking to people and supporting them with the right kinds of bin. And that middle picture at the bottom is what we call a wheelie box model, where householders are encouraged to put different kinds of waste in different boxes, keep them very separate. So glass is in one bin, paper and card in another, and metals in another, and then separate bags for things like batteries or textiles. And that way you keep, and separate container for food as well. And if you keep all the materials separate, then they can have that, they retain their value. You have a nice clean bale of cardboard or plastic, then you just take it to the depot, bale it up, and you can sell it for reprocessing straight away. If it's mixed up with last night's dinner and it's got hazardous waste in there and chemicals and a tin of old paint, then everything is contaminated. It's much harder to manage. So separation at source is a big driver in the UK. And we're working on encouraging people to do that, both in businesses and in residential dwellings. Now, vehicle on the bottom right there has got separate compartments for all of the different kinds of materials, so that when it's collected, it's quite a laborious process, takes quite a long time, but each material is put in a different compartment, kept very clean, and then it can be reprocessed. And just to say, the picture on of the two green bins, those big Euro bins on the left there, that's one of the main companies in the UK that produces bins of different sorts, called Egbert Taylor, and I'm sure they're exporting extensively to Russia at the moment. Just to talk a little bit about the other bullet points on that slide, we're working on a policy of extended producer responsibility, so that this means that companies that put materials on the market will have to take responsibility for what happens to them at the end of their life. And if it's a difficult to manage product, like a Tetra Pak, which has got lots of different materials in it, then there'll be a tax in order to subsidize the cost of reprocessing that product. And if it's an easy to manage product, like a PET water bottle or a tin can, then the tax will be much lower, because the cost of managing that on the public purse is much lower. We've also got a waste prevention strategy out for consultation, and trying to persuade people to waste less and to consume less is quite a difficult task, but there's a lot of debate, and I think certainly the environmental movement is keen to explain to people what the consequences are of overconsumption. And then again, waste data tracking I've mentioned, just really to understand how much waste is going into the system, what it is, and where it's going. Could I have the next slide, please? This is a little bit more about the policy environment, because our energy department is also concerned with how we manage waste and what happens to it when we manage residual waste. So if you send your residual waste, there's the stuff that can't be recycled very easily, to an energy from waste facility. That's often incineration, but it can be gasification or pyrolysis, something more high tech. And then we have clean electricity, which is sent into the grid in the UK. You can also make gas from anaerobic digestion or from gasification schemes, and we have an incentive mechanism to bring forward the technology to deliver that. It's called the Green Gas Support Scheme for people that are injecting biogas into the gas network. Developing a biomass strategy at the moment, which is to really understand what to do, what the best options are for managing biomass. And there's also quite a lot of work going on carbon capture and utilization and storage, CCUS, which I think Paul touched on a little bit earlier. And then other policies which government and local government need to be aware of are things like planning policy and the insulation of buildings and the management of heat in buildings, which is also connected to, and the design of buildings for the management of their waste, so there's enough space to separate out all your materials. And then just to mention, there's another work stream which I'm involved with, which is about renewable fuels from waste. So from organic materials and from residual waste, you can make kerosene. And at the moment, biofuels are all subsidised through a mechanism called the Renewable Transport Fuels Obligation. But there's a new subsidy being discussed now for sustainable fuels for aviation. And this is mainly driven by the airlines, who are keen to try and move towards a more sustainable approach. But there's a number of projects in the UK where people are making fuels from organic materials, and those are all expected to come on stream in the next few years. Thank you. Next slide. So I just want to talk a little bit about recycling as well. There's one of the many companies in the UK that's very active in the waste management space is called BIFA. They do a lot of collection of waste from companies and from dwellings, but they also do a lot of waste treatment. And one of the things they do is recycling of plastics. So they make new PET bottles, plastic bottles from old bottles, and they also make food grade HDPE. So in the UK, we often use high density polyethylene for milk bottles, and they have a circular method for collecting those bottles and putting them straight back into the food chain. So that's a real circular economy. And polypropylene PP as well for the pots, tubs and trays. They can actually make food grade plastics out of old plastics. So there's a number of quite large plants in the UK, and BIFA are now developing their internationalisation strategy. So it might be that they'll be able to support projects in other countries in the coming months. Next slide, please. There's a little bit more about the recycling of polymers. The key, as I mentioned earlier, is to have a uniform kind of polymer in your feedstock. So there's a lot of work goes into separating out different kinds of plastics and materials in material recycling facilities. So if you put together a whole lot of plastics or a whole lot of recyclable materials in one bin, then it's taken to what we call a MRF, material recycling facility. And some of that is sorted by hand, but mostly it's done electronically and with all sorts of very clever equipment, which sorts things by size and weight and different kinds of material and different kinds of polymer. And then if you have a nice clean waste stream, you can then recycle it into new materials. Next slide, please. I just wanted to finish again talking about anaerobic digestion. There's a picture of a JCB, which I think Trevor had as well, actually, on his slide, which is one of the companies that produces waste handling equipment, which is quite an important part of the waste chain. And this is a picture of an anaerobic digestion facility, which makes biogas from organic materials. You can use food waste or farm waste, or a mixture of both, or sewage, slurries. And those are the gas holders. There's quite a lot of companies that can build anaerobic digestion facilities and contribute to the gas cleanup and the gas management and handling. And then you can either inject it into the grid, or you can make heat from it and put it straight back into your farming process, or you can make electricity and use that for manufacturing or powering local buildings. So there's a lot of different aspects to waste management and a huge contribution it can make in terms of climate change. And if you want any details about UK capability, please get in touch with Trevor, and then he'll pass those inquiries back on to me in London. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. We are delighted to be here, so thank you very much for inviting us, and really interested in sustainable development. So it's certainly something we're looking into, not just in Russia, not just around in other countries, but also in Russia. Our office kind of mantra is about people, prosperity, and planet. So actually these are core values that we have in terms of how we do our projects, and how we think about architecture. So all of our metrics, all of our measurements for how we determine the success of a project is based on our response to people, planet, and prosperity. Essentially, we measure outcomes. So we try to measure for each project the outcome of a project in terms of environmental benefit, in terms of community benefit, but also, I think Trevor mentioned earlier, the need for an investment to actually generate a return. So we strongly believe that a sustainable approach can be beneficial for financial investment and can also be beneficial for the planet. So we're applying some of our ideas at different scales, from the scale of buildings, individual buildings, to cities, to kind of organization, sort of cluster organizations, districts, how buildings respond in context, and we're also looking at ecological cities. So this is a project we were just recently working on. It's in Oman, and it's a really interesting project because it's tied in with the idea of creating a new city which is more than 100% powered by renewable energy. So and we're trying to tie in with the vision, the Oman Vision 2040 for sustainable development. So again, we're looking at how our vision can actually meet the aspirations of the client. In other words, how can we deliver something which is sustainable, still has a kind of a financial benefit. This is an interesting project. It's near Muscat. It's bound on one side by farms, on the other side by the city, mountains, and then the sea to the front. So we took these elements, these ideas, and actually we went back in time. We started looking at the idea of the garden city. This is Ebenezer Howard, early kind of pioneering movement in garden city, innovative garden cities, how people can live and work in an environment where they are surrounded by nature, where you can walk to work, and where the agricultural kind of aspects of it are also quite near to where you are. So you have a proximity to nature, and I think this is also about well-being. So here what we're talking about is not just sustainability in the pure sense of how much carbon we can save, but also in terms of your mindset, in terms of your mental kind of well-being. So looking at this idea, we also looked at for this particular project, we looked at the idea of a city which is made up of villages. So I'm from London. London is a city made up of villages. And I find that quite interesting in terms of how we can take that idea of an urban village and create a multipolar city with agriculture in between. So the idea of creating a landmass with urban development interspersed by agriculture, if at all possible. We could do this more easily because this is a site that doesn't have anything. But you can also do it in a kind of an existing context by incorporating urban farms and agricultural development within the city fabric. So why does that help? It helps because firstly, you're greening the city, but secondly, also you're bringing the source of food and food production closer to where it's needed. So taking this idea of planet, we for this particular project, we sort of looked at the idea of these are considerations in the development of the scheme. So beyond net zero, or net zero and beyond, how do we achieve that? What are the goals? Beyond smart city. So actually now there are new ideas, pioneering ideas in Japan, for example, talking about Society 5.0, which is about a smart city which also has well-being, has human well-being in mind. And then we're also talking about people. How do people in a city, how do they communicate, how do they live together in a city composed of villages? That helps in a sense because you break down the city into smaller organizations, smaller communities, and through that you actually create a better, more cohesive idea of character and neighborhood. We're also looking at the idea of a completely walkable city. So a city that goes beyond the new ideas of a 15-minute walkable city, but a city that really does provide the means to actually go to the city center without any car or anything that is sort of structured. But obviously we need to get into the city, so we have solutions for that, which I'll show you in a minute. And then prosperity. So what is the idea here? The idea here is to actually create a development which is locally inspired, but also is profitable. So, it's no point us as architects, dreamers, coming up with ideas that nobody can pay for. The idea is actually to have something which can be delivered, which can be affordable. But also we're looking at an autonomous city. What do we mean by autonomous? Autonomous means a city that is self-sufficient in food production, self-sufficient in energy, and self-sufficient in terms of how it operates and its need for resources. So can that be done? We looked at this idea of this self-sufficient city, creating green routes through the city. It looks very much like the tree that I was showing you earlier, and that's no coincidence because we are quite inspired by nature in the work we do, but also in the sort of application of an urban idea and the integration of an urban idea with natural form. So what you're seeing here in these slides is the idea that the sort of brown areas there are the agricultural land, the red areas are the residential areas, and then you've got the park and the greenery, which then binds it all together. And here we're just showing an illustration of how the project can be delivered in different stages with the city growing organically. And we're creating these green routes. So it's interesting about this idea of mobility, of transport and mobility. So we recognize that there is a need, obviously, for the automobile. Still there is a need. So there's an area outside the center. So this area, just to give you an idea, it's 4 kilometers by 4 kilometers. So it's something that is not huge, but it can be delivered fairly efficiently. So this red circle in the center is probably about 2 kilometers in width. So that's the pedestrian zone. That's where no cars are allowed. And that other outer area is an area where you have electric vehicles or where you have carpooling. So the idea here is that the future, as we see it in terms of the automobile, is not an automobile that you own. It's an automobile that you maybe share or you are using in conjunction with your neighbors. So the automobile doesn't become an object of individual needs and wants. It becomes a kind of a collective tool that you can use and upgrade, and it also has a kind of a environmental benefit. And I think there's also a material benefit. So you're creating something which I think is much more sustainable. The idea of this city is actually based to some extent on how we create a city which is shaded. So Oman is a warm country. How do we create shading? That's organized by this urban grid. The urban grid is organized in a particular way to create self-shaded buildings, self-shaded walkways. And then really the idea, we ran some simulations, some tests about how the city pathways can work. So on the left, it's the northeast southwest grid, the urban grid, which actually creates a lot of shaded walkways. And then on the right-hand side, you see that thermal model, which actually shows you that the organization that we have actually works quite well in terms of providing self-shading. And then these are the pathways. So we have these organic pathways right the way through the new city. And then the thing that really binds it together are these photovoltaics. So we've proposed a huge number of photovoltaics, and it's quite interesting because we're talking about hydrogen as well. So the energy that we're using from the photovoltaics will then also, that surplus energy, will take seawater, because we're next to the sea, and will break seawater down into hydrogen and oxygen, and also water. So that water will be used for the planting, and the hydrogen will be used as a kind of almost like a battery, so that when the photovoltaics are they've already provided the energy and you can't store it. It's stored as hydrogen, and that can provide energy for the city. So what you see here, that image on the bottom left, that's how you can integrate photovoltaics with the agricultural farming. So it's an idea of the urban farm, but still having this huge capacity for generating energy. In fact, we can generate so much energy that we'll have far more than we actually need, and we can give that energy back to the city and sell it at a premium. So here you see an idea that was developed by a UK company, which is Seawater Greenhouse. And Seawater Greenhouse, they take this idea of taking seawater and creating this kind of microclimate, and the seawater evaporates. So you actually need less water to water the plant. So it becomes a very kind of a closed loop. And you generate water because as the seawater evaporates, you are cooling the space and you're collecting the seawater, and that actually can be used for some of the planting. So it's a closed system, it's a very much circular economy, and it's very much based on sustainable agricultural development. We're using also this idea of, as I was explaining before, the idea of taking seawater, excess energy will be used to create hydrogen. You get the question, what happens to photovoltaics? Are they going to be optimized? Are they going to be efficient? There's all kinds of new things happening. For example, nanotechnology can be applied to photovoltaics, and that will make sure that they don't collect too much dust and they remain highly efficient, because some of the problems with photovoltaics is that over time they can collect dust and they become slower. But there are new things coming through, and I think we need to embrace these new ideas and technologies as they come. Here you see an idea of how the photovoltaics can sit over the urban farms, and how also we are bringing in the sea and into the sea. Sorry, an existing wadi, which is a kind of like a river, and extending that through into the site. And then some of the environmental strategies that we're using in terms of mobility, in terms of urban mobility, in terms of capturing CO2, and in terms of our overall environmental footprint. So these are different strategies that we're now deploying, and how we can limit the carbon output of the city quite considerably. The red circle, the outline is basically the infrastructure we need. So that's a whole idea by itself. So when any city produces waste, you basically are taking it off to a site quite far away. Well, we think that that's a bad idea, that you can create an underground system where a lot of that waste can be processed, can be recycled, can be upcycled. We can take a lot of the things that we take for granted. For example, you use the bathroom, all that human waste goes very far away, is treated. Well, we could actually treat that locally, and we could use that waste for energy. And quite often we're forgetting about all the things that we're using, that we're throwing away, we're dispensing of, which actually could be really useful in terms of how we live as a society. Sochi is a project we looked at recently. We were doing a competition for the seafront. So here we're inspired a lot by the Arboretum, which is kind of a park which sits just by the seafront. And we're looking again at this idea of extending the park, creating this green ring around the city, embracing the city with this green walkable ring, and then also at the same time using this idea of hydrogen. Because we're near the sea, we can create this photovoltaic array. If any of you have been to Sochi, there are lots of areas, big car park areas, big areas of where you can put photovoltaics which are not intrusive, and through that we can generate energy. And we can also generate hydrogen using this kind of same idea of hydrogen technology. This is the kind of initial thermal modeling of Sochi seafront, and then some of the areas that we've replanned or we've kind of redesigned in terms of how we're going to extend the park and create this new seafront area. Unfortunately, I have a video, but it was a bit heavy, so it didn't come through. But I think you can see some of the images that we have. Also, the idea is to connect very deliberately the seafront to the railway station, because that doesn't really happen at the moment. So Sochi has a connection, but that then very much disappears towards the railway station. So the idea here being public transport, mobility, car-free development. Let's have a look. It's another image of the seafront and the idea of the massing, how that massing can work, and some of the buildings. There's a museum on the seafront. So these buildings that we're proposing are also carbon capture buildings. So we want to use a new technology that is 1,000 times more efficient than trees, actually, in terms of capturing carbon and actually generating energy with the photovoltaics as well. So there's a kind of a bigger idea. We really want to create in Russia, not necessarily in Sochi, but an idea of an ecological city, and I think that's really, really important. That if we can, actually, Russia has enormous gas resources. It will be more interesting, I think, for us to start thinking about a new type of development, ecological development, something that is, I suppose, more in tune with our current times. It's a university we did in Doha. It's an Education City University. This one is about microclimates. So just to illustrate how the project works. So this is about creating landscapes, gardens. This is a finished building around the building to cool the building and to provide also less demand for energy. And the facades are really interesting on this building because they have been modulated in a way to reduce the amount of solar heat gain, because heat again is a big problem in Education City. I think this is a drone footage. Oh, yes, you can just about see it. So you can see that our approach is quite expressive, but at the same time, this is a university and a mosque, so it has a kind of a function which is beyond just kind of an academic institution. It has a kind of a symbolic function. So the building has that kind of symbolism embedded within it. Here you see the building at the back, and you see, I think more importantly, you see how the landscape and the gardens flow through the building and how the connection between the inside and the outside merge. Because one of the problems in some of these countries is that people have forgotten how to live in the landscape without air conditioning, without all the kind of modern conveniences that people rely on. And our idea is to actually bring the landscape into the building. And these are some of the sort of other elevations. You can see in that particular earlier view how the facade modulates to mitigate the effects of solar radiation. And this is a really interesting project. It's completely opposite to what you just saw in Doha. This is a waste a landscape which was used as a municipal dump. It's in Rabat in Morocco, which is the capital of Morocco. So the site was used for clay. They used to take the clay out of the ground, and they made pots from the clay. So in time, there was a big hole in the ground, and the big hole was filled with garbage from the city. And the consequences were quite dire because it's next to the river, and all the contaminants and pollutants were leaching out from the site into the river. All the agricultural land near the dump was also contaminated, and some of the kids living in the area, because it's a poor neighborhood on the edge of Rabat. And these are the kids. These are actual photographs from the site, playing in the dump and getting all kinds of illnesses from it. But what you can see here is what was interesting about this project is that the dump was left as it is, and when you have a dump site, you basically give off gas. So there's a lot of methane and other gases that are coming off, noxious gases as well. Then you have seepage into the ground. So you have all these other problems. So what we did, working with the local authority, with the municipality, was to create the Morocco's first landfill gas capture facility. So what that entails is to you couldn't just take away the rubbish, but you could cap it with a certain technical sort of material that holds it in. At the same time, you can capture the gas, and the gas would actually provide energy for the homes. I think we provide energy for 5,000 homes. And on top of that, we also stop CO2 emissions. I think we save something like 250,000 tons of CO2 going into the atmosphere. So it's a really interesting project, and it's a community project, because the budget for the project was really small, but for us it was a really interesting way of working also with the local community. So here you see some slides of the landscape, how the landscape was transformed from being a dump into kind of a contoured landscape, and then how these are some of the slides, and how we then made the building. So it's a very low budget building made of the same material from the site, which I think is also interesting because it's part of that circular economy idea. And you can see this kind of red brick. And for us, it was really interesting because we really wanted to use something that was local and not something alien. And we really wanted to work with local people. And the idea was how we can train local people to build this building, how it becomes a community project. So this area was that former dump site, where we've now got flower beds and agricultural. It's a horticultural school, so you can learn about gardening, but it's got this nice landscape where you can grow plants, you can sell them, and the community is part of that. The community is also part of building the building. So we've given them skills in how to build and how to kind of integrate it into the landscape. Yeah, so I think I'm out of time, but I think you get the idea. So different projects, different ideas.